The cold, rusted metal of the car hood pressed hard against his cheek, scraping skin. But he didn't flinch, and he certainly didn't beg. He just watched the officer's reflection in the dirty windshield, a man drunk on cheap whiskey and unchecked power, raising a heavy asphalt-scarred baton to strike a blow that was intended to shatter his skull. To the three officers laughing in the dark, secluded parking lot, this was just another Friday night sport, cornering two strangers who had dared to walk into the wrong part of town, stripping them of their dignity before stripping them of their freedom. They thought they had trapped two helpless drifters. But what Officer Miller and his sadistic crew didn't know, what they couldn't possibly imagine as the baton began its downward arc, was that they weren't the predators in this scenario. They were the prey. In exactly 60 seconds, the man pinned to the hood would speak a single, terrifying sentence that would not only stop the blow mid-air, but would incinerate 3 careers, expose a decade of systemic corruption, and turn the hunters into the hunted. It was a Friday night at the Rusty Anchor, a dive bar sitting precariously on the edge of the county line, known for its flickering neon lights and unwritten rules about who was truly welcome after dark. The air inside was thick, a suffocating mix of stale beer, sawdust, and the lingering scent of grease from the kitchen, while a jukebox in the corner played a low, thumping country track that seemed to vibrate the floorboards. It was the kind of establishment where generations of locals had carved their initials into the tables, a place where everybody knew everybody's sins, and silence fell like a heavy, wet blanket whenever a stranger dared to walk through the heavy oak door. But tonight, the silence was heavier, sharper, and more dangerous than usual. 2 men had just walked in, moving with a synchronized, fluid grace that felt entirely out of place among the stumbling, weary patrons. They were identical twins, Marcus and Elias King. Tall, broad-shouldered black men wearing simple flannel shirts and dusty boots, looking for nothing more than a cold drink to wash away the dust of a cross-country drive. Marcus and Elias took 2 stools at the far end of the bar, isolating themselves from the crowd, their movements efficient and quiet. They were 35 years old, but their eyes held the weary depth of men who had lived through fires that would burn most people to ash. "Just like the spot in Hamburg, remember?" Elias murmured, his voice a low rumble that didn't carry past his brother's shoulder. Marcus cracked a rare, faint smile, tracing the rim of his glass. "Hamburg had better pretzels, and less staring." They were trying to enjoy a rare moment of peace, a brief respite on their way back to base, to visit their mother's grave in the next county. To the casual observer, they looked like construction workers, or perhaps mechanics, men who worked with their hands. But a trained eye would have seen what the locals missed. The way Elias scanned the room's 3 exits before even sitting down. The way Marcus positioned his body so his peripheral vision covered the entire room, or the specific tactical way they held their bodies. Relaxed, yet ready to explode into motion at a millisecond's notice. However, in the darkest booth of the room, shadowed by smoke and entitlement, trouble was already brewing in the form of 3 off-duty officers, Miller, Vance, and Grady. They were the self-proclaimed kings of this small town. Men who wore their badges like crowns even when they were in plain clothes. Miller, the ringleader with a face red from years of alcohol abuse, was already 4 whiskeys deep, his eyes glazed with the kind of arrogance that comes from never being told no. He watched the twins with a sneer, his hand resting near his waistband where his service weapon usually sat, twitching with anticipation. To him, the presence of these 2 confident black men wasn't just an intrusion, it was a personal insult to his territory. He nudged Vance, a younger officer desperate for approval, and kicked Grady, the heavy muscle of the group, under the table. "Look at that," Miller whispered, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "We got tourists, or drug runners, in my town." The atmosphere in the room shifted from tense to volatile in a heartbeat. The bartender lowered his head, wiping a clean glass for the 10th time, and the patrons shifted in their seats, knowing the show was about to start. Miller stood up, the legs of his chair scraping violently against the floor like a scream, signaling the beginning of a nightmare. "You two look mighty comfortable for people who clearly took a wrong turn." Miller's voice cut through the air, slurring slightly as he and his cohorts formed a tight, suffocating semicircle around the twins' stools. He didn't wait for an answer, leaning in close enough that the sour smell of whiskey and chewing tobacco became a weapon in itself. The bar had gone deathly quiet. The jukebox had stopped, and every set of eyes was fixed on the confrontation. Marcus didn't turn around immediately. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his sparkling water, his pulse not rising a single beat per minute. When he finally swiveled his stool, his expression was mask-like, a dangerous kind of serenity that Miller, in his drunkenness, mistook for fear. "We're just passing through, officer," Marcus said, his voice even, deep and devoid of aggression. "We'll finish our drinks, pay our tab, and be gone." The use of the title, officer, made Vance twitch nervously. They hadn't identified themselves yet. It was a subtle signal that Marcus had already clocked the bulge of concealed carry weapons, the specific tactical boots, and the regulation haircuts. He knew exactly who he was dealing with, but the officers were too blinded by prejudice to realize they were being analyzed by a superior predator. Miller laughed, a harsh barking sound that echoed off the walls, and he slammed his heavy hand onto the bar counter, rattling the twins' glasses. "I didn't ask what you were doing," Miller sneered, his face inches from Marcus's. "I said you look lost. And in this town, when people look lost, we check IDs to make sure they aren't unwanted elements." He snapped his fingers at Elias. "Wallet. Now. Both of you." Elias looked at his brother, then back at Miller, his eyes narrowing slightly. "We haven't committed a crime, and you aren't in uniform," Elias said calmly, his voice tight with restrained discipline. "We are private citizens having a drink. You have no probable cause." This was the trigger. Miller's face flushed a deep, angry crimson. To be cited the law by someone he viewed as inferior was the ultimate humiliation. "I am the law," Miller shouted, spittle flying, poking a hard finger into Elias's chest. "Probable cause is whatever I say it is. You think you're smart? You think a suit and some big words make you safe?" Grady stepped forward, cracking his knuckles, physically blocking the path to the door. "You're upsetting the captain," Grady grunted, playing his part as the enforcer. "Maybe we need to teach you how to respect local authority." The walk to the heavy oak door felt like a funeral procession, every second stretching into an eternity. Marcus threw a $20 bill on the counter, but nobody moved to take it. The patrons looked down at their drinks, cowards refusing to witness the injustice unfolding in their midst. Elias pushed the door open, the old hinges screaming in protest, cutting through the silence like a warning siren. They stepped out onto the porch, the screen door slamming shut behind them with a finality that made Vance jump. Outside, the world was pitch black, save for the rhythmic, buzzing flicker of the neon open sign, reflecting off the wet asphalt. The air had grown colder, biting at their skin. For a long, stretched moment, the only sound was the crunch of gravel under 6 pairs of boots, a slow, gritty noise that sounded like bones breaking under heavy weight. The wind howled through the nearby trees, masking the distant sound of the highway. It was a vacuum of silence where the rules of civilization no longer applied. Away from the witnesses inside, the officers' aggression spiked. Grady circled around to cut off their path to the main road, while Miller swung the handcuffs around his finger like a trophy. "See, the problem with you boys," Miller spat, his voice echoing in the emptiness, "is you think you can walk wherever you want, but out here in the dark, you're nobody, and nobody is coming to help you." The violence exploded with sudden, clumsy ferocity. Miller, tired of the talking, lunged forward, swinging his heavy metal flashlight toward Marcus's temple with lethal intent. It was a blow meant to end the night, a compliance strike that would put a man in the hospital. But it never landed. In a blur of motion that the human eye could barely track, Marcus shifted his weight, his movement fluid and practiced. He caught Miller's wrist in midair, twisting it with surgical precision until the bone audibly cracked, sending the flashlight skittering across the asphalt. Simultaneously, Grady tried to tackle Elias from behind, a bear hug meant to crush ribs. Elias didn't panic. He dropped his center of gravity, drove an elbow back into Grady's solar plexus, and executed a perfect hip throw, slamming the 250-pound man onto the gravel with a thud that shook the ground. It wasn't a bar brawl, it was a demolition. Within 4 seconds, the victims had neutralized the threat without throwing a single punch. But as Vance fumbled for his gun, panic rising in his throat, bright blue strobe lights flooded the parking lot. A state trooper cruiser screeched to a halt, and a uniformed officer jumped out, gun drawn, seeing only the aftermath. 3 local heroes on the ground and 2 black men standing over them. "Get on the ground, now! Hands behind your heads!" the trooper screamed, his voice cracking with adrenaline. This was the moment of true terror. Miller, clutching his broken wrist, scrambled up, screaming lies. "They jumped us! They went for my gun! Shoot them, Jenkins! They're armed!" The trooper, Jenkins, didn't hesitate. He saw badge holders in pain and strangers standing tall. "I said get down or I will fire!" Jenkins roared, his finger tightening on the trigger. Marcus and Elias slowly knelt, interlacing their fingers behind their heads. It looked like the end. The injustice was suffocating. They had defended themselves, and now they were about to be executed or imprisoned for it. Miller grinned through the pain, limping over to kick Marcus in the ribs while he was defenseless. "I told you," Miller wheezed, spitting blood. "I run this town. You're going to jail for assault on an officer, and you're never coming out." The hopelessness of the situation was absolute. The twins were handcuffed, face down in the dirt, as Miller raised his baton for one final gratuitous strike to Marcus's head. The moment from the beginning of our story. "Drop the weapon!" A voice amplified by a megaphone shattered the night. Tires squealed as 2 black SUVs boxed in the trooper's car. It wasn't backup for the police, it was the cavalry. A woman in a sharp suit stepped out, followed by 4 tactical officers with federal patches. It was District Attorney Reynolds, who had been alerted by the silent distress beacon on Marcus's military-grade watch. She walked straight past the confused trooper, her heels clicking on the pavement like gunshots. "If you touch him one more time, Miller, I will bury you under the jail," she said, her voice icy. She motioned to the tactical team, who immediately leveled their rifles, not at the twins, but at the cops. The silence that followed was deafening. Reynolds looked at Miller with pure disgust before turning to the brothers on the ground. "Major King," she nodded respectfully to Marcus, then to Elias. "Commander King." The words hit the parking lot like a nuclear bomb. Miller's face drained of all color, leaving him looking like a ghost. "Major?" he whispered, his voice trembling. Marcus stood up as the tactical team cut his cuffs. He adjusted his shirt, staring down at the terrified cop. "Major Marcus King, Army Rangers," he stated, his voice projecting command. He pointed to his brother. And Commander Elias King, Navy SEAL Team 6. We are active duty, currently leading the federal task force on police corruption. The irony was so sharp, it could cut glass. Miller dropped his baton. He realized in that horror-filled second that he hadn't just harassed two random guys, he had assaulted high-ranking federal assets on camera, while the very man writing the book on police corruption watched him do it. The fallout was swift, brutal, and public. By the time the sun came up, the video from Elias's phone and the dashcam footage from the DA's arrival had millions of views. It showed everything. The unprovoked harassment inside the bar, the racial slurs, the threats in the parking lot, and the clumsy, drunken attempt at assault. There was no spinning this, no internal investigation that could bury the truth. Miller, Vance, and Grady were suspended immediately, and within 48 hours, federal charges were filed. They weren't just fired. They were stripped of their pensions and faced prison time for aggravated assault, civil rights violations, and falsifying police reports. The trooper Jenkins was placed on probation for his failure to assess the situation. The King brothers incident became a national headline, sparking protests and forcing a complete top-to-bottom overhaul of the local department. The Rusty Anchor became a landmark. Not for the fight, but as the place where the untouchables finally got touched. For Miller, the punishment went beyond the courtroom. He lost his home. His wife left him after seeing the footage of his cruelty, and he was eventually forced to take a job at a warehouse 3 towns over, where nobody knew his name. Or so he hoped. Every time he clocked in, he felt the crushing weight of the badge he used to hide behind, now gone forever. He had spent his life demanding respect through fear, only to be dismantled by men who commanded respect through character and discipline. The twins, Marcus and Elias, didn't celebrate. They simply gave their statements, ensured the legal team had everything they needed, and went back to work. For them, this wasn't a victory lap. It was just another mission accomplished. They had turned a moment of potential tragedy into a lesson the world wouldn't forget, using their power to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The story of the King brothers serves as a chilling reminder that true power isn't loud, and it doesn't need to bully. Arrogance is a blinder that prevents us from seeing the humanity and the capability of the people standing right in front of us. Miller looked at 2 black men and saw only targets, failing to see the discipline, the rank, and the history that stood before him. He learned the hard way that when you judge a book by its cover, you might just get crushed by the weight of the story inside. In a world quick to judge based on appearance, remember this: the quietest person in the room is often the one you should worry about the most. Because dignity always wins, and justice eventually comes for us all.